Hi guys, hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Sandra. So if you're new here, I simply adore literature and authors and everything connected to it. And so here I do review books, share my emotions, give you some analysis, something to think of, some interesting facts. Happy Valentine's Day! I hope you're having a happy time if you're with a loved one or on your own or with a great book. I hope that you feel the love all around you. So today's video is going to be a little bit different from the others, because if before I just did an analysis of one book, then today I'm going to talk about 5 of my favorite 19th century romances. I've read a lot of books because 19th century was famous for romances in general, and there are so many famous authors like Jane Austen and Bronte sisters, and of course these books later they have a huge impact on the world right now. So for example, on the world of literature right now, because there are so many books that were inspired by them, but also movies and series, because if you're like me, love Netflix rom-coms, or Bridgerton is simply a concentration of all the 19th century romances. Before we get to the books, I'd like to talk about one more thing. So we have a genre, right? So romance. But we also have a movement which were popular in 19th century as well, romanticism. And romanticism and romance are not the same thing at all. So it can be confusing, but there is a huge difference. I will get to that in a moment. So Romanticism is a literature movement which was popular in the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, and it emphasized individualism and emotion. So it is, as I said, not the same as romance at all, because the term itself, so romanticism, it comes not from like romantic like we used to, but from medieval French romance, which means epic quest told in verse. Romantic works were a reaction to the age of the Enlightenment and Industrial Age. So in the end of the 18th century, we have this huge boom in technologies. We get all these new inventions, and philosophers, of course, such as Diderot and Montesquieu and Voltaire, and they all talk about the rights of a man. A person starts to change its conception about the world entirely. Before that, literature was going in the movement of classicism. So classicism is a whole another topic, but basically it was all black and white. It was all focused on the importance of government and that man should sacrifice his own personal motivations for the sake of others. And romanticism is basically denies all that and just rebels against that. So it's all about the person, it's all about their emotions, about their individuality, as I said, and it is not at all necessarily romantic. So there can be no romantic line at all. Not all romanticism is romance, but romance can be written in the movements of romanticism. I hope it makes sense. So if we were to list the elements of romanticism, we would say that it is one, interest in common man or woman, just a hero. And the second one, I think I'll tell both at once, it's individualism and spirituality. So all as I explained, we're now interested actually in what a person feels, not only their actions and what good does he or she do, but actually what does he or she feel in the process. What are their emotions? What are their struggles? What are their aspirations? The third would be the celebration of isolation and melancholy. The author highlights the uniqueness of a hero, his unlikeness to the rest of the world. He's so different from others, you know, like Bella from Twilight. One of the greatest examples is, of course, the Childe Harold's Pilgrimage by Byron, who had a huge impact. His works were in the movements of Romanticism. They are the iconic works of the Romanticism, and there's even a term, a Byronic hero. So it is a hero who really suffers his loneliness and he's different from the others, and he is disappointed in the world and himself, and he tries to find something, but he just can't, and he just struggles so much. And so yeah, this is Childe Harold. If you read the 18th, 19th century literature, there are a lot of heroes like this. And the fourth characteristic would be the celebration of nature, because I guess you know, in the classic works in 18th, 19th century, there is so much emphasis on the nature, on the world around, and there is never something to this. So, pathetic fallacy. Pathetic fallacy is a term that basically personifies the nature, describes it as a human in human forms, describes it as it had emotions and feelings. It can be seen in poems and in literature works, and yeah, there are a lot of scenery, a lot of connection, human nature, and the idea that in connection with nature, a human finds peace and calmness and some kind of enlightenment. I want to talk about one more movement, and it is the movement of realism, because some of the works we'll be talking about today are written in realism. So, realism speaks for itself, really. There is not much to tell. I mean, it describes the world as it is. It describes humans as they are. If in romanticism we took interest in a person, but it was this unique person, Byronic hero, who is so different from others, who's so unique, he's not like the others. And here is just a typical character, like the one you can see on the street every day, the one you can be yourself, and there's nothing so different about him. He's just a person, he's just a guy, literally just a guy. So that would be the first element of realism, so realistic characters. The second, so the realism, it was largely popular in 19th century, maybe in second half of 19th century, and it focuses much on labor, on work, on its importance, because, you know, historical context, like a lot of laborist movements in that time, industrialization is still going, and since the beginning of the 19th century, we constantly get some new technologies, some new improvements, human rights. It's largely emphasized in realism, so a lot of characters in realism, they will be celebrating the importance of labor, and they will be working really hard. We'll see that in the books we'll be talking about later. The third element is internal motivations. So again, if in classicism and maybe even in romanticism, we talked about the motivation of hero being something large, something huge, some idealistic idea, some for the sake of others or for the sake of the greater good. And here, internal motivations, again, we're just down to earth, and the hero's like, yeah, I want to do this because just I'm that person, I feel like it, it's all out of my own desires. And the fourth would be straightforward speech. This is very important in the works by Virginia Woolf. Was one of the first to put this kind of element in her works. So if you read her works, it is just, you know, a strain of thought. So it is it's just the flow of the consciousness on the paper. It just poured all over. And in realism, there are not particularly some grand quotes, monologues. It focuses more on everyday speech, on different dialects, on slang, on everything we use right now, maybe in text and social media. Realism is all about that. And now, finally, let's talk about the genre itself. So, 19th century romance. Now, this is romantic in the usual sense of the word. So, this genre is focused on 19th century romance. I mean, obviously, it's all about romantic relationship, love, struggles a person overcomes to find it. It explores the themes of passion and desire, and it is often set in this Victorian era, so it also is largely affected by moral of the time and by society expectations. And so all that, in summary, just creates this complexity of romantic relationship, of person's inner thoughts and the thoughts of the society on that, and denial and forbiddance and passion. So again, there are some themes, many of which will be seen in the books of that period, and let's talk about them. The first, love in between social classes. So of course we have this forbidden love between a servant and a princess, or a maid and a prince, and they're struggling because they can't be together, but they're so madly in love with each other. And it is all about overcoming these social expectations and rules. The second is marriage for love. In the beginning of the 19th century, people are starting to be more free, more liberate in their life choices in general. And so if before that marriages were often arranged and for money, or status or between families, then now people are starting to actually marry because they love each other, and literature works reflect that, and they also tell stories of people who just want to be together against all odds. The third feature is Gothic romance. So this is something that affected largely my favorite dark academia. So in 19th century, spiritualism is also largely popular amongst aristocrats and ordinary people. Gothic romance, it just combines all this mystic suspense, horror themes. It is often set in some castles, and it's all about this mystical stories. Like, for example, Edgar Allan Poe is all about Gothic romance, or Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. It is pure Gothic romance. I already mentioned the fourth theme, Victorian moral values. So yeah, purity, modesty, it is all largely explored and thought about by the authors, and so they think about how a person should behave, how he should cope with his feelings, with his passion, with some forbidden sometimes, whether he should put first the moral or his inner desires, and it is all explored in these novels. The fifth topic is romanticized historical settings. So yeah, the stories are often taking place in the Regency period, and a lot of historical events might be taking place. And for example, I know it's not 19th century book, but it was largely inspired by that. So in Bridgerton, Netflix series, this is what romanticized historical setting looks like. The sixth topic I find very interesting is romantic friendship. So you know how in this 18th, 19th century works, there are often characters who are like best friends, but they act really like there's something more. So yeah, this is another feature of genre. So the friends, they show their affection for each other in a very romantic way, like they constantly touch, they might kiss, they don't hide their emotions about each other, but at the same time they stay friends. So another interesting feature is the tropes of mistaken identity and disguise. In many books in that genre, there is often a twist that somebody is, not who they seem, or behind a mask, or they pretend to be someone and they're like, "Hi, it's been me all along." And yeah, so it's just something that takes place a lot in these books and can be seen in many of them. Happily ever after endings. Yeah, this is so wonderful. This is so positive. Not all of the books, of course. So in some of the books, all of these topics are present. In some of the books, like only one or two of them. But in many of them, happy ever after endings take place, and characters get married, everything works out, and everything is wonderful, and rainbows and unicorns. And now at last, it is time for my book recommendations. So, I picked the 5 of my favorite ones. So in the 5th place, we have Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. So this won't be a deep dive, this is just a recommendation, so I'll just briefly tell you what's it about. So this passionate story about a servant Heathcliff and Lady Catherine Earnshaw is told from a narrator whose name we don't know. He just comes to a house in winter and he listens to a story told by a maid of Catherine, and so it tells the story of Heathcliff's obsession with Catherine. So I read it in autumn, so I felt this atmosphere, and honestly, I'm recommending books here for the 14th of February, so I guess it should be something more light and romantic really, but here is just for my dark academia lovers. If you want to read something dark and twisted and sick in some way, this is for you. Also, the family tree here is crazy. I googled it, I stared at the picture trying to figure out, it's really complicated, and all the while I was like, this is not love. It might be argued, but you just have to see it for yourself. I really wouldn't say Heathcliff's feelings as love, but more like an obsession sick sort of way. So it is written in the movement of romanticism, and it's in, Heathcliff is a servant, so common man. Look at him, and we look at his emotions, and we try to understand what's going on in his lonely, sick soul. And individuality, of course. Heathcliff is an individual, Believe me, I mean, he's so miserable, but he's so affectionate, so lonely, but proud. And so Heathcliff is a tortured, vengeful man, and in the novel we see the journey he comes from being a solitary servant to a besotted young man and to basically heartbroken, sick person. And if we're talking about genre themes, it is of course the example of Gothic romance and the love in between social classes. And I just want to give you a quotation here, which really chilled me to the bone at the time. You know, I was wild after she died, and eternally, from dawn to dawn, praying her to return to me her spirit. I have strong faith in ghosts. I have a conviction that they can and do exist among us. The day she was buried, there came a fall of snow. In the evening, I went to the churchyard. It blew weak as winter, all around was solitary. I didn't fear that her fool of a husband would wander up the glen so late, and no one else had business to bring them in there. Being alone and conscious 2 yards of loose earth were the sole barrier between us, I said to myself, I'll have her in my arms again. So Heathcliff is scary, and I would say that Wuthering Heights is even something more themed for Halloween than The Day of the Valentine, but nevertheless, it's one of the most groundbreaking romances of the 19th century, so I just could not mention it. And by the way, all of the books I'll be talking about today, I mean, they were released quite a long ago, so they all have movies by this point, and in many cases, not just one, so you can choose. And also, by coincidence, most of these movies, they were filmed just in 2010th year, something like that, so there was some large interest in 20th century romance at the time. So this book, for example, was turned into a movie in 2011, and you can see this film if you want. Also, I almost forgot to mention, oh my god, that Wuthering Heights largely inspired the Twilight. You can probably see it from the description, but yeah, so Wuthering Heights are actually listed as Bella and Edward's favorite book, which is kind of twisted really, because if you read it, then you know that the kind of love Heathcliff and Catherine have, it is not okay. It is not normal, and I mean, it can be doubted that so is Bella and Edward's, so I feel like there's some kind of hints there. The fourth place is taken by a work of Russian literature, in fact. So it is Anna Karenina, written by Leo Tolstoy, and I know that Russian literature is often seen as really depressing, and there are a lot of sufferings, and I mean, we talked a lot about Dostoevsky when we talked about Donna Tartt. And yeah, it is not always happy, but I can promise you it's better with Tolstoy. There is much more happiness in his work. So Anna Karenina in general, it is often hailed as one of the greatest works in literature in general, because Tolstoy in his novels in general, not just Anna Karenina, but as well, like, you know, War and Peace, for example, he's all about the psychology of heroes, and he really dives into them and sees just into their soul. And so the themes are faith and jealousy and moral and passion, and there are a lot. It is also a big book. There are a lot of tropes, a lot of characters, so you can find really anything you want in there, basically, anything to your taste. But the basic story is that, I mean, Anna Karenina is the sophisticated woman from upper class, so, you know, not really a common person you would have, and she is married, but she's not in love with her husband, and she devotes her passionate nature to Count Vronsky, and she has an affair with him, and it is all ending very tragically and has sad consequences for both of them. I promise, if you think that classical work is boring, just try to read it. It's like best series on Netflix, you know? It's like Bridgerton. So the movement here is not romanticism, as you might have guessed, but realism. And the genre features are love across social classes, so we can see that in example of Anna Karenina and Count Vronsky, who is a lower social class than Anna, and marriage for love, which is seen not only in the Anna and Vronsky relationship, but also in other heroes like Kitty and the other main character Levin. There are a lot of examples of romantic friendship there, so it is also very sweet to read. Romanticize historical settings, and I would say happy ever after ending, but not for all of the characters, so you'll have to find that out for yourself. But also, I've been thinking about doing a video, some deep dive in some of Russian literature works, so tell me which one would you want to see, maybe which writer, which work. And so about the ekranizations of the book, so there are a lot of Russian films filmed in different times, but there is an English movie released in 2012, again. And there were also some rumors that Netflix wants to do a series on Anna Karenina, and also I think they should. So as I said, it's like Bridgerton, and I think it would be just so very captivating to watch. The third place is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So we're into the classics again. If you think 19th century romance, you probably think Jane Eyre. So it tells a story about young orphan woman who struggles in these Victorian moral times and finds her love and independence with Mr. Rochester. It's all about social class and labor and morals and a woman's place in society, morality and self-discovery, all these themes. It is written in romanticism, so we can see common heroes. So Jane Eyre is a governess, just a simple girl, meets this dark, mysterious Mr. Rochester, and if we're talking about genre, it just scores a bingo, honestly, because it has everything. I mean, it is gothic romance, so the atmosphere again is not as cold as in Wuthering Heights, but still, it's large castle, it's winter, it's all this, mystical spiritualism. Also, here we see that trope of mistaken identity I'd be talking about. So Mr. Rochester, he, in some sense, can be called a Byronic hero, I think, with a stretch. So he has this dark secret. I won't be telling you which it is, but he has one, and there's violence and blood and blood-stirring thrill and horror. Again, this is something Halloweenish, Octoberish, and so we try to figure out what Mr. Rochester really is and what secrets he holds. And another topic is love in between social classes, so governess and Mr. Rochester, Victorian moral values, because we begin in an orphan house where Jane Eyre is being taught all these really strict morals, and we see how she suffers through her childhood because she is so poor and has no money, and the orphan house is also poor, and the children don't eat well, and they're being forced to a lot of labor and rules that often don't make sense. But a little spoiler alert, it has a happy ending. So Jane and Mr. Rochester, they end up together and all is well. The movie for this book was released in 2011, and the book itself inspired many other authors. Sometimes I find in bookshops like books that are either some continuation of the story of Mr. Rochester and Jane, or the same story set in modern times, or some detective story with the characters have some same names, but also it inspired some original works, and I think it is fair to say that it inspired, for example, one of my favorite books of all times, which is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. It is a 20th century book, but in Rebecca, there's also this common girl, and she meets this dark, mysterious man with secrets, which is also kind of similar to Mr. Rochester. So I highly recommend you both of these books. The second place might be a little unexpected and different from the other works, because it is actually a book not from Europe like all the others were, but from the USA. And it is not generally listed 19th century romances, but I think it is so unfair, because I'm talking about Little Women by Louise May Alcott. Even though it is untypical to be in this topic, when we talked about Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre, but Little Women is such a nice book. I mean, it has a huge contrast between Wuthering Heights, because Wuthering Heights and even Anna Karenina and Jane Eyre, they explored the characters in some, mostly dark way, maybe a little depressing, dark stories with murders and mysteries. And Little Women is like a fresh air. I mean, I'm talking about two books here. The first volume was released in 1868, and it was called Little Women. And then next year, Louisa released the second volume called Good Wives, and that just became a one large work, so Little Women. So I'm talking about the whole story here. So the story itself follows the four sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy. and how they grow up, how they deal with their feelings, how they find their place in the world and love. And so the novel addressed three major themes, which is domesticity, work, and true love, all of them interdependent and each necessary to the achievement of its heroine's individual identity. Little Women has been read as a romance or as a quest or both. It has been read as a family drama that validates virtue over wealth, but also as a means of escaping that life by women who knew its gender constraints only too well. It is really light and wonderful. This book takes a second place in my list because this is my recommendations, okay? And personally, I think that if you want to read something romantic and sweet in the St Valentine's Day mood, it is much better to read Little Women than, for example, Notre Dame de Paris. So the movement is realism, once again. The characters are really realistic, just these common girls in a common life. Also, one interesting feature about genre is that it's a Bildungsroman. And a little spoiler for the next video, because we'll be talking about one very interesting book in the genre of Bildungsroman. But basically for now, Bildungsroman is a roman about characters growing up, learning about the world, becoming themselves in general. So it is often tells a story of characters from their childhood and to adulthood. So Little Women is of course the themes like marriage for love and romantic friendship, maybe love between social classes. I mean, if you can say that Laurie, the boy who lives near the March sisters, if he's from the upper class, I mean, you might say, so maybe there's something about that. And it is all about happily ever after things. And I know that some people think this book boring, especially because it's so, highly moralistic and it teaches you about the world. But I think that sometimes it is wonderful to read these things, and this book is just my ultimate comfort book. And it is romantic in the usual sense of a word, and it's sweet and kind and family, and I think that we all need that sometimes. And also, it is impossible not to mention the 2019 movie with wonderful Emma Watson as one of the main heroines. The movie also, it is rather new, it has beautiful picture, beautiful scenery, magnificent actors, so even if you read the book, I recommend the movie to you as well. And finally, we came to the first place on our list. And I think you can guess what it will be, because it will be the oldest 19th century romance, which was released in 1813, and since then it became an English classic. And I'm talking about none other than Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So Jane Austen is a phenomenal writer. Her other works include like Emma and Sense and Sensibility, and of course she's a classic. So Pride and Prejudice, just in case you don't know, it's a story about Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. So the characters who navigate through social classes and misunderstandings, and the prejudice and pride, of course. So Pride and Prejudice is known for its wit, for its play with Victorian morals, social commentary, timeless display of romantic relationships. So basically we have this common girl, Elizabeth Bennet, who by chance gets acquainted with Mr. Darcy, who's this cold aristocrat. Like, we talked about Mr. Rochester, but Mr. Darcy is kind of a kinder version of him without this big dark secrets. So Pride and Prejudice, of course, is not a gothic romance. It's more light in a way, but still, Mr. Darcy, most of the novel, he remains this mystical individual, and we don't know, like, wow, he's so full on himself. But in the end, of course, we celebrate him and Elizabeth, and I mean, who wouldn't want Mr. Darcy in life, We're all looking for our Mr. Darcy here. So Pride and Prejudice, the movement is romanticism, of course. We're not talking about any realism yet, so early in the 19th century. And the genre features are such as marriage for love, obviously, love across social class, romantic friendship, Victorian moral values, and happy ever after endings, of course. I think you know the movie, because the movie is also really popular, released in 2005. There is an uncountable number of works which were inspired by Pride and Prejudice, but one of the examples is Bridget Jones's Diaries. I mean, one of the characters is literally named Mr. Darcy, so I don't think there's a lot to tell about that. I mean, Pride and Prejudice is just, all-time favorite. I mean, it's a classic for a reason, even though, I mean, Can you believe it was released in 1813? And yet it is so good, and I love it so much because it's so funny but serious at the same time, and there are such a great twist. The first time I read it, it's just I want to relive that moment. The way I gasped, you know, like, oh, Lydia, what's going on? And and of course this line with Mr. Dawes and with Elizabeth's sister and her love story, and I was just so deeply involved in characters. I'm not a really shrewd reader. I mean, I'm no Sherlock Holmes, and I think as a reader it's kind of a good quality to have, at least for me, because I enjoy things so deeply, and so I read and I sincerely have no idea about what's happening next. Even despite all my experience with books, still when I read them for the first time, I am shocked by almost every twist, and so it made, of course, reading Pride and Prejudice especially fun, as I would just talk about Pride and Prejudice and my love for it for hours and hours. But in fact, I think this is where we're going to leave this video, because I think it has been long enough. So let me know what you think, if you agree with my opinion on the top 5 19th century romance books. Who is your favorite romance interest from the books I listed? So we have Heathcliff, we have Count Vronsky, we have Mr. Rochester, then let's say Laurie, and Mr. Darcy. Who is your favorite one? I think I'm gonna tell that in my channel and in my Instagram, so you can follow me there. The links will be down below and in the end of the video. But that's it for now. Have a wonderful 14th of February, whether you're with your couple or on your own. It's time to celebrate love for each other, love for yourself. So have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time with another great book. Bye bye. And it emphasized. And an empathetic fallacy is a term that is basically personifies. So we have Heathcliff. Jesus Christ, I can't pronounce his name.